Too bad it didn't go as you thought it would. Just get that divorce paper submitted and disappear. My husband changed as soon as my father-in-law was admitted to the hospital. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Tom and I are going to divide his inheritance. You aren't getting anything. There is no money for a wife who is incapable of doing her own housework, he declared. I had no words. When I went to the city hall to file for divorce, however, I discovered a terrible truth. Nancy is my name. I'm a 24-year-old housewife. Tom, my husband, is 40 years old. It's a May-December romance, as people say, but it didn't go through a romantic courtship like in the movies. It just kind of happened. It was just luck that I ended up working for Tom's father at a construction company. For some reason, the company's president seemed to like me a lot from the start and repeatedly asked me to marry his son. The reason for this was that Tom, who was to become the company's next president, seemed to have no other marriage prospects. The president, worried about his future, was pessimistic about the company. He was concerned that the company he had worked so hard to establish would end if there was no heir. Tom's father, who had met my father through work, even came to our house and asked for me as his wife. My family owns a construction company that has been in operation for generations. My father used to work for Tom's father's company for experience when he was younger. Tom's father helped my father in any way he could, including teaching him how to run a business. Maybe because of this, my father couldn't ignore the offer and decided to hear what he had to say. However, due to the age difference, my father did not agree immediately, but instead said that Tom and I should have a dating period. He wanted to respect Tom's and my choices, he said, but the conversation about marriage would have to be after a dating period. Tom, on the other hand, knew that the marriage to me was a condition for taking over the company, so he agreed to this proposal of my father's. I had a good relationship with Tom, and we went on many dates for dinner, movies, shopping, and so on. After some time together, Tom and I had grown close enough to believe that we would get along fine if we got married. We were officially engaged not long after that. Shortly after the engagement, Tom's father became ill and had to go to the hospital repeatedly. Instead of Tom, who was at work, and my mother, who couldn't drive, I, his fiancée, had to take care of my father-in-law in the hospital. My mother-in-law told me to focus more on housework for her family, telling me I'm not doing a good job considering I was going to become her daughter-in-law. "Nancy, hurry, the morning reception hours will end. Take him," she exclaimed. Even before we married, I felt treated as if I were a maid. But I said, yes, I'm coming. I'll start the car." I was looking after my father-in-law one day when my mother-in-law suggested that I move in, even though it was a little early because it would be easier for me to take care of him. I agreed to this, considering having to commute from my parents' house to take him to, and from the hospital every time. It might be easier for me just to live with them. I would have been moving there soon anyway. I assumed the wedding would take place after my father-in-law's health improved, so why not just write the marriage paper as I move in? There were no rumors of him having other relationships when I began living with Thomas's family. I soon realized why he had reached the age of 40 with no relationship experience. Anyway, he is extremely conscientious about money. He was a miser who insisted on not wasting any money. He'd also keep meticulous records of our dates, telling me how much he'd spent on me, how much he spent on food and gas. Furthermore, my mother-in-law, who enjoys bullying others, is always next to me, being sarcastic and abusive. No one would dare approach them. Tom was very generous with his mother's spending and said nothing when she spent a lot of money on travel and name-brand goods. I was wondering if he was a mother-con who loves his mother so much that he prioritizes her over anything else. To be honest, I thought I made the decision to marry too quickly. I reasoned I should have moved in but not married him until I was more familiar with their personalities and domestic affairs. However, when I considered my father and my father-in-law, I found myself speechless. My father-in-law's unconditional love for me was the only thing that kept me going. That day, I was getting ready to take my father-in-law, who hadn't been feeling well since the previous day, to the hospital first thing in the morning. Observing that my mother-in-law was treating me like her housekeeper, she said, "Nancy, have you made breakfast yet? The way you cleaned yesterday was unacceptable. Can you hurry up and just do it?" My mother-in-law did nothing but move her mouth as she sat in front of the television. Tom was sitting beside her, idly watching TV. "I'm sorry I don't have time. I have to take your husband to the hospital," I explained. "Oh well, then shouldn't you have gotten up earlier? I have to go out as well. Make us breakfast before you leave," she responded. I wondered if they could do some of the work themselves, seeing the two not even caring about their husband and father. "Father-in-law, please wait a moment. I'll be finished in a minute," I hurriedly said. I rushed and made breakfast, serving it to Tom and my mother-in-law. I went to my father-in-law after finishing everything and tried to help him stand up. "I'm sorry I'm making you work so much. I have to apologize to your father, too," he said. At that same time, my father-in-law collapsed. "Are you okay?" I was horrified that my mother-in-law and husband must continue to eat breakfast as if nothing had happened. In any case, I ended up calling an ambulance. My mind just went blank until I heard the sirens. When the ambulance arrived a few minutes later, they left, leaving my father-in-law and me behind. When we arrived at the hospital, he had regained consciousness and was admitted. After the hospitalization procedures and doctor's explanations, it was already dark outside. "If something should happen to me, I will leave you something, Nancy," my father-in-law said as I sat with him on the bed. "It's my way of apologizing for making you endure my unappreciative son and wife. I guess I've been focused on work too much to know what's going on at home," my father-in-law continued in a weak voice, apologizing for wanting me to be Tom's wife. Soon after, I heard someone clear their throat by the door. Tom and my mother-in-law came in. They both approached me and inquired about the condition of my father-in-law. I assured them that he would be fine, just needing to rest a little, and he'd be out of the hospital soon. I told them what the doctor said. Perhaps it was just my imagination, but Tom clicked his tongue, and it appeared as if my mother-in-law was disappointed. Several days later, when I was getting ready to visit my father-in-law, Tom and my mother-in-law handed me a paper and said, "Once you have filled this in, please go and submit it to the government office." The form had green ruled lines on it, and it was a divorce decree. Tom had overheard the conversation in my father-in-law's hospital room and told me, "My father became weak and said he was going to give you part of his inheritance, but we are not going to give you a penny. Wasn't it what you wanted all along? To marry someone so different from your age? But your plan was unsuccessful. Go file for divorce, and you'll be a stranger to us." He cursed me profanely. What? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I wasn't expecting him to say so much. "Just go to the government office. Tom and I are going to divide that man's inheritance equally. There is no one to share it with. There is no money for a wife who is incapable of doing her own housework." What I was hearing was disgusting. My father-in-law was about to be released from the hospital in a few days, but they sounded as if they expected him to die, which terrified me. "How can you be so cruel? He's your family. He's not going to die. He will come home from the hospital and get better. And don't make fun of me, saying I wanted inheritance. That is not something I intend to do. Of course, this marriage is not something I want." I hurried to the municipal office after filling out the divorce papers. I needed to get rid of these people to get them out of my life right away. When I arrived at the municipal office and hurriedly handed in the report, the receptionist returned it to me with a strange expression on her face. "Was there something about the form?" I asked. He said my name wasn't correct, so I assured him that it was my name. He still said it doesn't match the records. This time I was asked for my maiden name, and it did match. The official laughed and said that my marriage certificate had never been submitted. We had never been married. He returned my completed divorce paper to me. I contacted my mother-in-law to find out what had gone wrong, and she replied, "Oh, I completely forgot. I had it all this time." I didn't believe her. She lacks common sense. She mistreated me because I was her daughter-in-law. "What? You did it on purpose, and you've been acting like there was nothing wrong and was just using me as your maid." This time I couldn't stay polite because it would be difficult to ask you to look after the house if you're a stranger. But a wife would do anything for me, and I could ask her for anything. On the other end of the phone, my mother-in-law was laughing, seemingly without malice. Oh, she doesn't have to worry about her share of the inheritance. I heard Tom's voice and laughing loudly. I was almost unable to contain my rage. For them, I was determined to fight back, to not let them get away with this. First, I called my father and requested that he accompany me to the government office. I quickly explained the situation and hung up the phone, and my father came running into the city office, surprised. I asked the person who had just assisted me to explain the situation again in front of my father. I even obtained a certificate of residence to confirm the facts and discovered that not only his name but also his address remained the same. I was duped into thinking that because I had registered my marriage, my address had not changed while I lived in that house. Nonetheless, I was given the burden of being his wife and was forced to work hard. When it came to the inheritance issue, I was told to leave. I'm not sure how to accept the fact that I was treated this way. Even my normally mild-mannered father was enraged. I hurried with my father to the hospital where my father-in-law was staying. When we arrived at the hospital, my father-in-law noticed my father standing beside me and politely said, "You didn't have to come all the way here to see me." But as he listened to my father about this whole thing, his face became increasingly agitated. We sat in his hospital room and discussed what kind of sanctions we would impose on the two. Neither Tom nor my mother-in-law had visited him since the day he was hospitalized. Tom's father made a proposal to my father, knowing that he couldn't expect Tom to marry properly and become the family heir. Tom's father wished to entrust my father to succeed his business. Fortunately, Tom's father's business was profitable, so there would be no loss if it merged with or into my father's business. Tom's father believed it was acceptable as long as the company that he has safeguarded can continue to exist in whatever form it takes. Customers and employees would almost certainly leave if Tom took over the company given his personality and character. If that happened, there would be no way for the company to survive. This is not a difficult choice I made, but a decision for the future. It's the best way to prevent our relatives from acquiring the company. And then Tom's father burst out laughing and announced his divorce. She thinks about money so much that she goes out and spends all her time in luxury without even visiting her husband. She deserves this. Is this enough to make up for the trouble I've caused you guys? He asked, turning to face me and my father. My father and I exchanged glances and raised the corners of our mouths as if there could be no greater punishment. The lawyers in the accounting firm my father had hired got to work the next day. Finally, they decided to merge Tom's father's company with my father's company, retaining the company name. Tom, the company's vice president, was fired, and an executive candidate from my father's company was transferred to fill his position as vice president. Official decisions will be made when Tom's father gets back to work. This will come as a surprise to Tom and his mother. Thus began the countdown to making them fall into hell. My father-in-law recovered completely and was discharged from the hospital 2 weeks later. My father and I went to the hospital to complete the discharge procedures and then picked him up and drove him home. When we got to his home, my mother-in-law was gone, and Tom was working as usual. I could only describe them as cruel people. They had no idea that the next day they would be regretting their heartlessness. The following morning, I went back to my original work. There was a new vice president. Tom's father opened a morning meeting in a large conference room and discussed the company's future. He informed them that the company would be absorbed into my father's and that the vice president would be replaced. Then Tom came clutching a letter of termination, and my mother-in-law holding a divorce decree. "Hey, Dad, what in the world is this? What in the world are you thinking?" "I didn't hear about this," Tom exclaimed. "I didn't hear about anything either. How could this be happening so suddenly? What in the world are you thinking?" His mother-in-law joined in. The entire conference room was stunned to see the two of them ranting in front of so many employees. That's exactly the kind of lunacy I was hoping for, I thought to myself. "It's you," they exclaimed as soon as they found me. "You did something, didn't you? Aren't you the one who set this up just because you wouldn't get your inheritance?" "I didn't do anything. You guys started all this," I replied. "That's enough. You're bothering me in the morning meeting," Tom's father said, his tone cold. "Get outside." Tom and his mother-in-law were kicked out of the conference room by nearby employees. Tom's father apologized to the entire conference room, finishing his story and bringing the morning meeting to a close. Tom and my mother-in-law, who had regained their composure by then, repeatedly asked for forgiveness from me and Tom's father. Of course, I had no intention of accepting their offer, so I ignored them. They appeared to be hanging around the company for a while, but they have recently stopped showing up. The security guards have given them strict warnings and they can't get in. They were also both asked to leave their home, according to Tom's father. They are currently living together in a dirty apartment near their former home. As for me, I am living a peaceful life as an office worker. My father, on the other hand, is still angry and is preparing to file a claim for compensation from Tom and his mother-in-law for what they did. The two have lost all hope of earning a living. This must be the start of hell for them. I won't help them, of course. I hope they've realized that the way you treat people will always come back to haunt you.